Now we're going to move on to our second speaker today. I'm delighted to introduce Professor David Lowe from his company Syndial. A little bit about David. Professor David Lowe has a background from defense to academia, spanning over a quarter of a century in machine learning, network computing, data analytics, and decentralized information algorithms and architectures. Syndial is a new SME startup based in Malvern and actually a cohort 1 member of BetaDen, focusing on mathematics of machine learning and decentralized architectures exemplified by blockchain. Syndial has invented and is now commercializing its product offering. So I'd like to hand over now to David to take you on to presentation number 2. Just a short reminder as well to say that please pose your questions on the Zoom platform Q&A, which we'll be going to after David's presentation. Thanks.
Excellent, lovely. Thank you, Linda. Thank you to Tom and Adrian as well for that excellent introduction. I wanted to broaden out some of the ideas and concepts behind blockchain and how they impact on what's called Web 3.0, which is just about to start. But I did, I'm afraid, want to talk to you about accountancy, triple entry accountancy. But if I'd have titled the talk that, then you'd have all turned off before now. So if you just bear with me why that's relevant, we'll be going through a discussion on why that implies the decentralized web is about to hit everyone. And this will give a completely different set of opportunities for future e-commerce. First, however, the basic current internet is broken. Why do I say that? Well, actually, it was Tim Berners-Lee who said that. He said it last year when he introduced the contract for the web. Now, Tim Berners-Lee is concerned that his original aims that he established from 1989 onwards has now become rather subverted, and the web control now is rather dominated by small groups of individuals rather than having ownership of the World Wide Web by society as a whole, which is what he was envisioning originally. So his comment is, if we leave the web as it is, there's a very large number of things that will go wrong. We need to turn the web around now, was his thought. Now, it's worth bearing in mind, the web is only just over 30 years old. The internet, however, is 50 years old. That goes back to ARPANET, and just a quick comment that ARPANET itself was designed as what's called a distributed peer-to-peer network, deliberately because of the Cold War issues at the time, and there was no single point of attack in peer-to-peer, and it was more resilient to attack. I'll come back to that shortly. So what people call Web 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, very broadly, when the web started out from Tim Berners-Lee's original document, that was Web 1.0. It was primarily a read-only web. It was peer-to-peer, local content, static web pages. So being ancient, when I would set up my first website between my work's next computer, talking to my little computer at home, then I would have a peer-to-peer location and all the content was stored on my computers. Nowadays, currently we're in Web 2.0. Now, this is much more a read-write web. It's full of dynamic content. We've got social networks, blogs, and it operates in a centralized way. The programs which operate on the data and the data itself are all stored on large centralized. The decision-making and coding is all done at the centralized servers, and information is sent out to the users. We're about to hit what's called Web 3.0. Now, Web 3.0 is known as the semantic web, also called web of data, and it actually is also going to be called a personalized web, where there's much more of an interactive user experience. But it's going to be a different type of web. It's going to be actually peer-to-peer. It will be going back to the original roots of how the internet was set up. We'll have different protocols, things called IPFS is likely to emerge, the interplanetary file system, rather than IP addresses, which we're about to run out of. But the primary thing I want to talk about is the fact that this will be a decentralized web, which makes it distinct to what we already have. Now, triple entry accounting. Okay. Actually, this is really interesting. Now, a lot of what Adrian and Tim talked about on the blockchain side, things to do with secured chains of data blocks and smart contracts. Actually, this is old technology. Way back in Web 1.0, secure chains of data blocks were cryptographically linked as a way to get around of the issue of how do you guarantee what time a given digital document should have when it's put onto the internet, which is a non-trivial problem. Smart contracts were introduced by Nick Szabo in 97. However, the main innovation came from Ian Grigg. Now, Ian, his photo's here, old photo. He's ex-Block 1 CTO. He's now in Materium in London. And he introduced the concept of triple entry accounting in the digital sense. There is a triple entry accounting called momentum accounting in accountancy, but this is different. This is triple entry accounting where, on my little diagram on the left here, instead of just a traditional way of having credits and debits, so that every credit would have to correspond to a debit in someone else's account, that process is subject to fraud and various other loss of information going on. However, by introducing a third independent party, so a public record, a public ledger of transactions, which is cryptographically encoded, so personal information isn't there, but the public ledger maintains a record of what was agreed between the two parties, Alice and Bob. And if Alice was to dispute this with Bob, or there was some dispute on a transaction, there would always be a record in the public ledger that could be referred back to sort out any issue. As Ian said, it's tough to lie when everybody is watching. So this idea of a signed receipt, which attaches itself to double entry bookkeeping, this is the basis of blockchain. So Ian Grigg introduced this idea in 2005. Blockchain itself was introduced in 2008 by Satoshi Nakamoto, and the very first Bitcoin Genesis block was set up on January 3rd, 2009 by Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, blockchain is not Bitcoin. Blockchain, it's just a database protocol. Okay, it's quite a neat little protocol. It's immutable, so you can't delete it. You can't modify it. If you add anything to it, if you try and change it, an entry, a record of that change is also immutably written into the same database. And everyone can have a copy of this database in a decentralized way. So in that case, how do you agree what entries are stored in the data? Well, this is where this concept of consensus comes in that Adrian mentioned in his talk. So the community agrees what's stored by a mechanism of consensus. So the computers at the bottom, which are storing the information, these machines have a mechanism by which they agree. In the Bitcoin blockchain network, it's this thing called a proof of work. But there are many other types of consensus mechanisms, and indeed many other types of decentralized ledgers other than just blockchain, which use some of these different consensus mechanisms. So the primary thing is that what we've introduced here by this little mechanism is something which is secure, it's decentralized, it's immutable, and you've got community ownership of it in some sense. So what? I mean, so what, right? The internet's working fine. Well, actually, no, this is a massive game changer, right? Decentralized here means it bypasses so-called trusted third parties, such as Google, Amazon, banks, and governments. There are many decentralized ledgers that operate, not owned by big business. I've given a little list on the left-hand side here. Protocols are being developed and have been developed to allow people to make use of a decentralized version of the internet. But of course, users wouldn't care about that because users would need to know how to work with these things. Why should a user have to know what decentralized is? They want to use browsers, messaging apps, YouTube, email is good, Google Docs, eBay. Well, actually, all of these use cases all have decentralized equivalents which already exist, and there are several choices of them. There's the Brave browser, decentralized browser, Peepeth, Jammy for video conferencing, by the way, Graphite for Google Docs. There's a version of WhatsApp called Stealthy. The YouTube equivalent, there's several. There's DTube and Elbury. So these apps already exist and already operate on decentralized networks. By the way, today, NHSX and the government are introducing a contact tracing app on the Isle of Wight. The UK has chosen to use a centralized system. So the information sent from the mobile phones is sent back to a central database. That central database then alerts people if you've been near other people and they advise you to go home or whatever. The UK and France seem to be the only countries adopting a centralized approach. The Apple and Google suggestion, collaborating together, they are introducing a decentralized version of contact tracing. In fact, they don't call it contact tracing. They just call it exposure alerts to be more relevant. So an interesting little thing there that the UK government started to adopt a centralized approach to this problem. Speaking of COVID, you may have come across this slightly curious case of the two doctors in America, in California, who have been running a testing clinic for COVID-19. And they've tested over 5,000 people, and they gave a press conference. And basically, the press conference, it was merely a statement of their results, and they indicated that a lot of people seem to have contacted the virus, but very few people died from it in their region. Very few people had strong symptoms, and they were basically indicating that the lockdown in America as they were having it was too severe and wasn't based on the information they now have, and they were implying it was more like flu. Now, YouTube, or someone inside YouTube, decided this violated YouTube's community guidelines. And so if you want to listen to these doctors' press conference by YouTube, I'm afraid all you're going to get is the blank screen you see here. Never fear, the decentralized web comes to your defense. So if you go to the decentralized web using the Brave browser and using the Elbury equivalent of YouTube, there's the two doctors. And you can go to Elbury and listen and make your own minds up as to whether or not what they were saying is whatever, citing civil unrest, or, I mean, these two guys don't particularly look very terrorist-like, and the reason why YouTube pulled, I'm not sure, but this is a good example of how come a centralized approach may not be in a community interest. It takes away one of your choices. So, again, so what? I mean, why would we be caring about that? Well, let me come back to Tim Berners-Lee. His view, it's one I share, that people want to have a web they can trust. People want apps that help them to do what they want without spying on them. So he's introduced this idea as a protocol called Solid, and a concept of a pod, which is a where you would put, your pod belongs to you, it's controlled by you, it's where your medical records sit, it's where your social contacts, your friends, your financial information, your will, your photos, correspondence, these all sit under your control. They could be in your house or they could be somewhere else located, and indeed there could be multiple versions of them on the decentralized web, but basically this is your data, you control it. Your browsing history is in here. And so this is a separation between the data of the individual and the applications which want to operate with your data. So in examples of using your data, there would have to be some sort of an agreement. You could allow applications to use your data. There could be a small micro charge if they used your data. And in this way, they would provide personalized experience to you in the future decentralized web. There's no tracking because you own your tracking history. It's not centralized. The control of what happens is governed locally. And it's all community census driven because of this idea of what can be stored and what can't. So again, this is what Tim Berners-Lee is trying to do, trying to get back some ownership of an individual's identity back to the individual. Fine, but again, so what? You know, I'm a business, right? So, but the point here is this is not just about people. It is about business. So currently with business to business, business to customer, consumer, you would have to be going through the third parties who are already centralized and running the wide internet. You have to trust them implicitly that they would not use the information from your company for their own purposes. Web 3.0 gives us direct person-to-person interaction. So this gives companies now the direct low-cost access to individuals' data. You do not have to buy expensive large databases or rely on Google, Amazon, or others to provide that data. There's digital trust between these anonymous parties because it's on this decentralized web through the blockchain or equivalent. The data from the company is protected. There's corporate memory involved. There are no barriers to this direct person-to-person, peer-to-peer interaction. And above all, there's a secured, guaranteed audit trail for an independent third-party validation. You don't have to trust the person or yourself. There's an independent audit which could be relied upon to do this. Now, this isn't in the future, it's now. Indeed, it's already a year or two past. Let me give just a few examples of large organizations who are currently using blockchain and blockchain equivalents to effect transactions. Now, the automotive sector, we've got examples of Porsche using the blockchain platform. Volkswagen is using a supply chain using the IBM blockchain platform. That is a Hyperledger open source platform to track the mineral supply chain. In energy, there's an energy platform based on smart cities and using a decentralized protocol to track energy spending. Food, for a couple of years now, Walmart have been trialing with IBM field to table supply chain of fresh goods to check and validate how they are progressing, if they've been subject to odd temperatures or if the supply chain's been interrupted. And that's been going on for a couple of years already. Adrian mentioned diamonds through Hyperledger, but through Everledger, but Russia's Ministry of Education has introduced a system for tracking diamonds by the blockchain network. Maersk, again mentioned by Adrian. So Maersk have a blockchain-based tracking system for tracking their large container ships as part of the supply chain. To counterfeit drug policing, the MediLedger network has a decentralized blockchain-oriented network to track the behavior and transitions of drugs. And so if that supply chain is interrupted, there's a record of the entire history of the drug supply chain. So any wrongdoings, there's the third-party independent verification of what may have gone on. And when we are swapping energy with our neighbors to charge homes, cars, and we're interacting with wind and solar, there's a blockchain version being introduced by the energy companies that allow micro trading with validated costs provided on a blockchain. Okay, this is my wrap up. What I've tried to indicate here is that blockchain is not all about cryptocurrency. So if your concepts are linking blockchain and Bitcoin together, decouple those, because blockchain actually suggests a very, very much wider deployment of e-commerce on decentralized ledger technologies as we move forward. It is a major game changer for the new web. It provides significant opportunities because you get a chance to bypass the big guys who may control what you can and can't do, what you can and can't see. The huge implications I've listed are here. It's decentralized. That's a big positive. There's no single point of control. It has downsides, but it's a big positive. The third part is that, the next part is that there's a third party independent trust that goes on, and it's publicly viewable on most blockchains. This gives an opportunity for personal data privacy, where you can get control of your own data back, and you can, because it's controlled back to you and you own your data, that therefore has an opportunity now for monetization and different ways of operating on the internet. And as far as business is concerned, I've tried to indicate that there are opportunities for new business methodologies in future e-commerce. And thank you, Linda, and thank you, BetaDen.
Okay, if we could hand back now to our Q&A slide. Thank you very much, David. That, again, a very illuminating presentation there, which I'm sure, looking at some of the questions that have been flowing in through the time you've been presenting both presentations, yeah, it's certainly more than food for thought.